Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. I think this is almost as full of room we're going to get, but it is recorded and will be available to watch online for everybody. This is our second workshop on the 5-year evaluation of the GSPs. This workshop's focused on the Oxnard Pleasant Valley Basins. I'm going to give a little background on what we're doing. SGMA requires groundwater sustainability agencies to evaluate their GSPs every 5 years, and they specify the minimum scope that evaluation needs to include. We started this process in 2023, and there was a kickoff stakeholder meeting in August 30th of last year, and that was recorded. That's online for if anybody wants to see how we started this process in 2023. This is the second workshop focused on Oxnard Pleasant Valley and focusing on the modeling results. And I want to just reiterate that the 5-year evaluation, what it is and what's required by SGMA, it's not a rewrite or redo of our groundwater sustainability plans. You know, we're building on the past efforts that we went through when we originally wrote those plans, the assumptions everybody worked on, the modeling scenarios that were developed for that, and all that work that was done in the initial GSP. You know, this effort is to evaluate the GSP in light of any changes that have happened in terms of new data, new information that we can plug into the modeling, new projects that can be modeled for future scenarios. So today, we're going to walk through the timeline of what we're doing here and all the engagement opportunities for you to engage in this process, and we really value your input. We're going to talk about the previous modeling that was done on the GSP, and then the modeling that's been done for this 5-year evaluation. And again, significant discussion on the opportunities for engagement. And on that, I just want to remind everybody there's a sign-in sheet when you came in. If you're not already on the FCGMA emailing list, please sign in, give us your email so you can be notified of these types of meetings in the future. With that, we have Dudek, our consultants, Jill Weinberger and Trevor Jones, who are really going to be walking through this whole presentation. This is the last time speaking, hopefully. And also, the presentation they are presenting, there are handouts up front, and this is also available online if you want to find it. So with that, ready to roll, Trevor?
Yep.
Okay.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Arnie, for the introduction. So again, my name is Trevor Jones. I'm a hydrogeologist with Dudek. We have been working with Fox Canyon to implement the GSP, and now we have been going through the GSP evaluation process. Like Arnie mentioned, we had a kickoff meeting for this back in August. Today, the discussion is going to focus on the modeling, and not just the modeling, but how projects are being incorporated into that, and how that's going to affect our understanding of future sustainability and future groundwater levels across the basin. We have structured the talk into 4 really key segments. Again, we're going to start and end with that discussion of engagement opportunities. We're going to walk through where we've been in the evaluation process, where we're going to, and then how stakeholders and the public can be engaged throughout that. We will discuss, spend a lot of time on the current modeling that's being done for the GSP evaluations, and then we're going to add the context of what was done for the GSP to kind of set the foundation for how we've approached modeling for this 5-year evaluation process for the OPV. To start, again, we have a detailed overview of the timeline for the whole evaluation. So the state mandates that the 5-year evaluations for Oxnard and Pleasant Valley be submitted to DWR by January of 2025. So that would be this upcoming January. Those evaluations are due to the state. Back in August of 2023, there was a kickoff meeting that outlined everything involved with the evaluation. So a review of the undesirable results, a review of the contents of the GSPs for the 2 basins. And then since then, Fox Canyon staff have taken specifically the approach to modeling for these evaluations to the Fox Canyon board to present an overview of how the modeling will be addressed, how it will be updated, and how it will be used. There's a big gap, right, between August and April of 2024. During that time period, the 2024 meeting is where we're at today. During that time period, our team has been working with Fox Canyon to go through the mechanics of the GSP evaluation. So reviewing the plan area, reviewing current groundwater conditions, and evaluating how the conditions are reflective of sustainability within the basin. Where we're going to, between April 24 and the end, I don't know if there's a laser pointer, I guess not. From April 24 down through January of 2025 is really some additional nuts and bolts of the evaluation process. It's looking at updated model scenarios, evaluating how those projections impact our understanding of the sustainable management criteria defined in the GSPs, evaluating how that impacts our understanding of the sustainable yield, and then preparing draft reports that will be provided to the public for review and comment. As I've mentioned a few times, today we really are focusing on the modeling. So we are going to specifically discuss how Fox Canyon is approaching the development of the model scenarios, how those model scenarios will be used to estimate the sustainable yield and sustainable management criteria, and then the steps that are being taken to finalize those model scenarios and interpret those model results. And before we get into that, again, I want to add a little bit of extra context of what's guiding a lot of the modeling and interpretation of those model results for the 5-year evaluation process. As described in the Groundwater Sustainability Plan for Oxnard and Pleasant Valley Basin, their groundwater sustainability is assessed using 6 sustainability indicators. Those indicators are shown on the left-hand side of the screen and are chronic decline in groundwater elevations, reduction of groundwater and storage, seawater intrusion, degradation of groundwater quality, land subsidence, and depletion of interconnected surface waters. In the Oxnard and Pleasant Valley Basin, the primary sustainability indicator that guides the establishment of the minimum thresholds and measurable objectives, as well as the estimate of the sustainable yield, is that seawater intrusion sustainability indicator. Our understanding of seawater intrusion and our projections of seawater intrusion through the modeling that we're going to discuss are going to guide how groundwater levels are managed and how pumping is understood to affect seawater intrusion into the future. Now again, a little added extra bit of context is that seawater intrusion occurs in 2 aquifer systems. We have the upper aquifer system shown in the 3D block diagram on the right in this kind of pale tan color. The upper aquifer system is comprised of the Oxnard and Magoo aquifers, and then we have the lower aquifer system, which is comprised of the Hueneme, Fox Canyon aquifer, and Grimes Canyon aquifer. Both aquifer systems have historically experienced seawater intrusion, and the modeling that is being performed, that was performed for the GSPs and is being performed for the 5-year evaluations, evaluates seawater intrusion into both systems. So that's the primary sustainability indicator that we're evaluating with the modeling is seawater intrusion. How that evaluation process was done and is being done for the GSP is through the use of the Ventura Regional Groundwater Flow Model. This is a numerical model that was developed by United Water Conservation District and is actively maintained by United. For the GSP, that model was developed and calibrated to groundwater elevations that were measured across the Oxnard, Pleasant Valley, and West Las Posas management area from the period from 1985 to 2015. And I should note too that the model domain during GSP development is shown here in the figure on the right. It extended out into the Pacific Ocean. It covered the entirety of the Oxnard Subbasin, the entirety of the Pleasant Valley Basin, and then into West Las Posas, the majority of, yes?
So there is
a pointer?
There is a cursor. It's a little slow and squirrely to get on there. Oh, it's not coming up, is it? That's supposed to.
Oh, there it is.
Oh,
Did we do it?
There it is.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I will use
And
that.
that'll
Thank you,
show
Kim.
up on the recording too. On your
Great.
slides.
Okay, this is the lucky screen.
I think it works on both. I'm not sure.
Oh,
It's just really slow.
I'll hold and we'll see if I can describe it while the pointer comes up. So the figure on the right-hand side of the screen shows the active model domain of the numerical model that's used for projecting future groundwater conditions in the Oxnard and Pleasant Valley Basins. The green boundary, which is a little bit faint here, that shows the model extent. And again, what we're trying to just hit home here is that the model is designed to cover the Oxnard, Pleasant Valley, and West Las Posas management area of the Las Posas Valley Basin. The model was independently peer-reviewed and evaluated to characterize uncertainty and confidence in model predictions, as well as characterize its appropriate use and integration into the GSP. Now, with an understanding of the model confidence based on these peer reviews, the Ventura Regional Groundwater Flow Model was used to develop historical, current, and projected groundwater budgets that characterize historical seawater intrusion into the basin, as well as projected future seawater intrusion under a range of projects and pumping scenarios. How the model was used specifically is 2 key metrics were extracted from the model. Not extracted, but the results were extracted and then interpreted to constrain 2 key metrics. The first is an understanding of the sustainable yield, which does not include a bunch of question marks on either side of these little equations here. I will walk through what that is when we get there. Unfortunately, there's some, I don't know, software translation issues that we're going to have to work through. But for the groundwater sustainability plan, 6 different modeling scenarios were evaluated. These modeling scenarios evaluated what we call future baseline conditions. So if pumping in the basin continued at the 2015 to 2017 rates under a range or projected hydrology, the model was used to evaluate what average annual seawater intrusion into the basin looked like over the sustaining period from 2040 to 2070. Those coastal flux values are shown in the bar chart on the right-hand side of the pane that shows the average annual estimated seawater intrusion from the model under the 6 different scenarios that are shown or summarized in the table on the left. The key here is that those scenarios evaluated the influence of different pumping conditions as well as different projects on the coastal flux into the Oxnard Subbasin during that 2040 to 2070 time period. Based on the relationship between pumping in each scenario and the estimates of coastal flux, we developed an estimate of the sustainable yield for the Oxnard and Pleasant Valley Basin, which is shown in the lower left corner of the pane surrounded by a bunch of question marks. The question marks are broken up, unfortunately, for the Oxnard Subbasin. That upper equation, it should read UAS or upper aquifer system. The lower equation should read LAS or lower aquifer system. And in Pleasant Valley, that should read the older alluvium in the upper equation and the lower aquifer system in the lower.
Those are available.
Yes, yeah, thanks for that, Arnie. They are available and they print out correctly in the handout that was at the front of the room. So, first key metric that's extracted from the model is the estimate of the sustainable yield. The second key metric that is guided by the model results are the sustainable management criteria, or the minimum threshold groundwater elevations and measurable objective groundwater elevations, which are shown here in this map that's displayed across the screen. I'm going to spend a little bit of time walking through this map because it's going to show up a few more times throughout the discussion. We have an overview graphic that shows a general schematic of the Oxnard Subbasin. Each of those circles that are outlined in this dark gray symbology represent key wells in the subbasin that are used to evaluate sustainability. And then each of these panes, individual graphics that we've shown here are a select number of those key wells that are screened in the Fox Canyon Aquifer. We have within each of those graphs the historical groundwater elevations that are measured at each of those key wells shown in black. We have 2 different projection scenarios. We have, there's a typo, the baseline should actually read projects with reductions. So if you go back to the table on the previous slide, that's a projects with reduction scenario. And then we have an additional reduction scenario. Those 2 scenarios are presented in the GSP and shown here with the blue and green lines. Now, on top of those, we have the 2 sustainable management criteria related groundwater elevations. We have the minimum threshold groundwater elevations, which are shown in red, and those groundwater elevations were defined based on the model projections to limit the landward migration of the 2015 saline intrusion impact front inland or landward through the 2040 to 2070 period. The blue line represents the measurable objective groundwater elevation, which is the groundwater elevation that would result in no net influx of seawater intrusion into the basin and no net outflow of groundwater out of the basin over the 2040 to 2070 period. So the key here is that the model's used to really estimate two things in the GSP, the sustainable yield and used to constrain the minimum thresholds and measurable objectives. And that is what we will be reevaluating through the updated modeling that we'll be discussing in the next few slides. So where do we go from here? We just discussed at a very high level what was performed and what was evaluated for the GSP. For the 5-year evaluations, the modeling really has been completed in a three-pronged approach. First is evaluating updates to the numerical model, so that would be incorporating new data that's been collected or made available into our understanding of the hydrogeologic conceptual model of the OPV. In addition, the Ventura Regional Groundwater Flow Model was extended through water year 2022 to evaluate how well the model reproduces current groundwater conditions. So for the GSP, that calibration process ended in 2015. Now the model's been extended an additional 7 years through the end of water year 2022 as a way of, again, evaluating how well the model reproduces recent groundwater elevation measurements based on our understanding of groundwater usage and trends within the basin. Secondly, for the 5-year evaluation process, the model scenarios have been updated, which we'll spend a good chunk of time discussing today. Those model scenarios have been updated to incorporate new project information to reflect our current understanding of projects and their implementation timelines and how they would affect long-term groundwater sustainability. We have updated also hydrology. We'll discuss that in a few slides as well. I don't want to jump too far in that direction. And then we are, again, forecasting conditions through the end of water year 2069. So it's a little bit of a shift for the GSP. It was the end of calendar year 2069. Now we're switching to the water year to better represent reporting that is currently, groundwater extractions as are currently reported to Fox Canyon in the 50-year projection horizon. Where we're going is using those models in a similar way, those model scenarios in a similar way to reevaluate the metrics that are defined in the GSP. That would be reevaluating our understanding of the sustainable yield and reevaluating the minimum thresholds and measurable objectives that are established and their relation to future seawater intrusion into the Oxnard Subbasin. So I'm going to march through each of those blocks, starting with the updates to the numerical model. So since the GSP was adopted by the FCGMA board and submitted to DWR, United has continued development of their Ventura Regional Groundwater Flow Model. First and foremost, the model was extended up to the upper basins that run along the Santa Clara River to encompass Mound, Fillmore, and Piru subbasins. That informs current predictions of how those basins interact with the Oxnard Subbasin in the Forebay area. Secondly, new geologic data was incorporated into the model to revise our understanding of the stratigraphy along the coastline specifically, and redefining our understanding of how the semi-perched aquifer is separated from the upper aquifer system down near Point Mugu. That is this graphic shown on the left shows an updated confining layer thickness map that characterizes our current understanding of the thickness of the confining layer between the semi-perched and upper aquifer system. And lastly, the Ventura Regional Groundwater Flow Model was updated along the coastline, again to better reflect stratigraphy and to better reflect our understanding of groundwater elevations along the coast. And as I mentioned, the model was extended through water year 2022. Again, we're back to that overview map of the Oxnard Subbasin. Again, this is a high-level overview of summarizing how well the updated model matches current measured groundwater elevations in the subbasin. We have that same overview schematic of the subbasin We have measured groundwater elevations shown in that same black line, and we have the simulated groundwater elevations through water year 2022 shown with this gold kind of mustardy color line, chosen just to have some contrast with black. Overall, what we see is that the model reproduces current measured groundwater elevations well, or similarly well to what was performed for the GSP, and that that United's revisions to the model improves predictions of groundwater elevation lows specifically along the coastline, which is an important feature when evaluating and using the tool to estimate future seawater intrusion. In the Pleasant Valley Basin, we see similar trends. The updates to the model have resulted in a tool that matches both the mean groundwater elevations and groundwater elevation changes across the Pleasant Valley Basin. And again, these are pulled from hydrographs that are specifically from wells that are specifically screened within the Fox Canyon aquifer. So this should provide some baseline understanding of how well the model might project groundwater elevations into the future based on our understanding of how it reproduces groundwater elevations currently. Now we're going to jump into the model scenarios. So we've provided an overview of what was done for the GSP, an overview of how the model was updated. Now we're going to jump into how the model is being used. The model is being used in a similar way, again, as what was done for the GSP. There are 4 scenarios that are being evaluated as part of the 5-year evaluations for the Oxnard and Pleasant Valley Basins. The first 3 are similar to the GSP. The 4th scenario we'll spend a little bit of time on because it introduces a new project that will shift the management framework of the Oxnard Subbasin when implemented. The first scenario is that future baseline scenario. Again, it is the same general framework as what was done for the GSP, but it incorporates an updated understanding of current groundwater extraction trends, and it expands on the suite of projects that are represented under baseline conditions. And really, the expansion of projects that are included here reflect the ongoing work that various agencies have been involved in to implement new projects in the basin and to bring new water into the basin. Secondly, we have a no new project scenario. This scenario takes that future baseline scenario and incrementally adjusts groundwater pumping until we reach conditions where during that 2040 to 2070 period, there's no net seawater intrusion into the basin. We'll spend a little bit of time on how that differs from how the sustainable yield was estimated for the GSP, but the general framework here is we take the baseline and we iteratively adjust pumping. The third scenario is a project scenario. Again, it adds to the suite of future projects that are evaluated under the GSP conditions, or under the GSP. And also, similar to the GSP, it evaluates the impact of demand reduction through a voluntary temporary fallowing program. That's the same management action that was implemented and represented in the GSP. That project or management action has moved forward. And the last scenario is a projects with EB scenario. That's the United's extraction barrier brackish water treatment project. This scenario runs separately from the other 3 because the project is intended to draw water levels down along the coastline near Point Mugu, with the intent that as water levels are drawn down, brackish water that is brought into the basin through operation of ebb wells will be extracted, treated, and delivered. So where other scenarios might be bringing water levels up to mitigate against seawater intrusion, ebb will be drawing water levels down right along the coastline, which will require a reevaluation of how water levels are managed within the Oxnard Subbasin. There are a few key components of the modeling that will remain consistent. The first is hydrology. For the GSP scenario, again, we're looking at a 50-year projection horizon. Excuse me. For the GSP, that 50-year projection horizon was selected to be the 1930 to 1979 hydrologic period. That same period is used for the 5-year evaluations, but the first 3 years are chopped off because we're no longer starting our projections in 2020. We're starting them in water year 2023 at the end of the current condition simulations. Now, importantly, we have, again, the figure on the right-hand side of the screen has a lot of information on it. It shows the cumulative departure from mean precipitation under historical conditions, so that would be measured precipitation that's shown in the black line. And then we have projected cumulative departure from mean precipitation shown on the right-hand side of that dashed line. The light gray line represents the hydrology as it's represented in the GSP. So if we just pulled that hydrology straight from the GSP, tacked it onto the current simulations, that's the hydrologic record we would get. And we know water year 2023 was a wet water year in which there were a large volume of water was diverted from the Santa Clara River and recharged into the subbasin. Under the GSP hydrology, those conditions are not reflected. We start the simulation in a drier than average year where that volume of Santa Clara River water would not be available and brought into the basin under the future scenarios. So to address this, we replaced that 1933, which would be the first water year simulated in the projection horizon. We replaced the hydrology in water year 1973 with the hydrology from water year 1978. 1978 was selected due to its similarity in both precipitation measured in the Oxnard Subbasin, as well as similarity in Santa Clara River diversions. So we had measured data for how much water was diverted in water year 2023. We had data for how much water was diverted in 78, and those two volumes were similar. So the hydrology was modified in that first year of the simulation period to capture those conditions and better capture the benefits that those conditions have on groundwater elevations in the Oxnard Subbasin, or in the OPV. The second is pumping. So we have the same set of hydrology that's going to inform the hydrologic record, the availability of surface water for deliveries and recharge throughout the projection horizon. We also have the same starting point with groundwater production that will be, again, the starting point for the baseline, the no new projects, and ebb scenario. The graph on the right shows historical reported pumping in the Oxnard Subbasin specifically. For the GSP, what was used was the 2015 to 2017 average, which is shown with this light, or this kind of, oh, there we go. This dark blue line, it froze. And now we went one too many. The dark blue line, the uppermost line in that bar chart, shows the 2015 to 2017 average pumping rate in the Oxnard Subbasin. That production rate was used as the baseline rate for the GSP, and it reflected pumping during drier than average conditions, right, with limited surface water availability. Our understanding of pumping since then indicates that groundwater production has decreased within the Oxnard Subbasin by about 5% compared to that 2015 to 2017 period. To better capture that change in groundwater elevation or groundwater production, the baseline pumping rates were updated to be equal to the 2016 to 2022 average rather than the 2015 to 2017 average. That production rate also is similar to the current allocation for the Oxnard Subbasin. Now, importantly, one thing we noted in the GSP, and it's worth noting again as we talk about pumping, is that pumping is adjusted by surface water availability within the Oxnard Subbasin. So in addition to the Ventura Regional Groundwater Flow Model, United also developed and maintains a surface water distribution model that routes surface water either along pipelines to users on the PTP and PVP, or recharges that water based on forebay conditions and demands on the pipelines. So we have a set baseline pumping rate, but the year-to-year and month-to-month production is not constant, and it will vary based on the availability of surface water. The same adjustment was made to the Pleasant Valley Basin. So we have the same bar chart shown here that shows historical reporting from 1985 through 2022. The 2016 to 2022 groundwater production from the Pleasant Valley Basin data for 2016 to 2022 period reflects about a 15% reduction compared to the 2015 to 2017 period. And that 2016 to 2022 period production rate was used as the baseline rates. Similarly, Just as pumping in the Oxnard Basin is adjusted by surface water availability, pumping in the Pleasant Valley Basin is adjusted based on surface water availability in the future scenarios as well. We've talked about hydrology, we've talked about pumping. The last major update to the baseline scenarios are the suites of projects, or the suite of projects that are represented under baseline conditions. For the future baseline scenario, projects that were included are projects that are currently under construction or planned for near-term construction or near-term operation within the Oxnard Subbasin, and those projects are listed in this table on the right and include the table on the right actually specifically calls out new projects that were not included in the baseline or modeling scenarios for the GSP. These new projects include construction of the Faro Rose Recharge Basin by United, purchase of supplemental state water project water and delivery by United, increased recycled water deliveries to Pleasant Valley County through the city of Camarillo, and then the construction of the Laguna Road Recycled Water Interconnect by United. The anticipated water supply associated with each of these projects is shown in the column with that header, a third column to the right, and then the projected pumping offset is shown on the far right-hand column. It's important to note that the first two projects that bring in about 8,500 acre-feet of water on average over the future horizon, the offset to pumping is variable. The ultimate location of that water depends, again, on forebay conditions, demands on the pipelines, and those are calculated internally as part of the modeling process and future projections. The City of Camarillo project brings about 1,300 acre-feet of recycled water and delivers that to Pleasant Valley County Water District to offset pumping. And then the Laguna Road Recycled Water Interconnect brings between up to 1,500 acre-feet of recycled water. But the pumping offset for the modeling purposes is zero, because our current understanding of that project is that it delivers excess water from two operators in Pleasant Valley County, or in the Pleasant Valley Basin, and we're not simulating excess recycled water availability. The recycled water that is currently delivered and produced by the City of Oxnard Advanced Water Purification Facility, AWPF, is delivered to operators along the coastline and along the, I believe it's the PTP. Those deliveries of the AWPF water is simulated based on Fox Canyon's current resolution with the city that assumes anywhere between 1,000 and 2,000 acre-feet per year of deliveries. For modeling purposes, we've assumed that those operators will receive about 1,500 acre-feet per year of recycled water to offset their pumping. In addition to these projects, the Conejo Creek project is maintained. So that's a project that was represented in the baseline scenario for the GSP. That project remains consistent with the GSP here, and the North Pleasant Valley Desalter project remains consistent with the GSP. So we have updated and expanded the suite of projects and maintained the projects as they're represented in the GSP here. On the net, these new projects provide about 6,800 acre-feet per year of new water into the Oxnard Subbasin. So what does that look like? When we incorporate these new projects, we incorporate the updated hydrology, and we revise pumping based on the current understanding of groundwater usage trends within the Oxnard Subbasin. So again, we have this schematic that we've seen a few times now. What we're showing is similar to the first GSP maps that we presented. But now we have, again, the historical water levels shown in black, the measurable objectives and minimum thresholds shown on the chart. And then we have a comparison of the two different baseline scenarios. In gray, we have the baseline scenario, the simulated groundwater elevations from the baseline scenario from the GSP. There will be in the legend GSP 2019. Those are the previous baseline scenario projections. And the blue line, the lighter blue line, is the updated baseline scenario that was developed as part of the 5-year evaluation. Overall, we see groundwater elevations are higher in this updated 5-year evaluation scenario compared to the GSP. We see the benefits of that wet water year at the start of the simulation with the large recoveries at these wells that are screened in the Fox Canyon aquifer. And overall, in the Fox Canyon Aquifer, we see groundwater elevations that are about 5 to 25 feet higher than the GSP. What that translates to is water levels that are closer to the minimum thresholds and measurable objectives than they were during development of the GSP. We see similar trends in the Pleasant Valley Basin. Again, this is the same set of wells that we looked at previously, all screened in the Fox Canyon Aquifer. On the net, we have water levels in the Fox Canyon Aquifer that are about 30 feet higher than those projected in the GSP. So here again, we have we see the benefits of added projects, of updated pumping and updated hydrology. So at the end of the day, all of this gets related back to our understanding of seawater intrusion and coastal flux. For the 5-year evaluation, our characterization of seawater intrusion has been updated to focus on specifically seawater intrusion or coastal flux into the saline intrusion management area. We have a map of the various management areas shown here in the figure on the right-hand side of the screen. And along the coastline, we have 3 distinct coastal segments. We have a coastal segment that's north of Channel Island Harbor, and then we have 2 coastal segments south of Channel Island Harbor that represent the boundary of the saline intrusion management area. For this 5-year evaluation, we're focusing on fluxes into the saline intrusion management area where groundwater is impacted by seawater intrusion. For the updated model scenario, over that 2040 to 2070 horizon, the model is estimating about 1,600 acre-feet of seawater intrusion or coastal flux into the UAS in the saline intrusion management area, and about 3,200 acre-feet per year of coastal flux or seawater intrusion into the LAS within the saline intrusion management area. That represents about a 50% reduction in what was estimated from the baseline scenario in the GSP, and in the UAS, and about a 5% reduction in the LAS compared to what was estimated as part of the baseline scenario for the GSP. So while groundwater elevations and projects and updated groundwater usage trends have benefited groundwater elevations and conditions in the basin, we see that in the increase in water levels compared to the GSP baseline scenario, the reduction in seawater intrusion estimated from the model. It's important to note that the simulation still does not indicate that baseline conditions are sustainable. We have, of the 34 wells in the OPV, 20 of those still have water levels below the minimum thresholds during that 2040 to 2070 period, and we still are simulating seawater intrusion into both the UAS and LAS. That leads to, where do we go from here? So I mentioned there are 4 scenarios that we're evaluating. This was the baseline scenario. If nothing changes, if projects are implemented as they're currently designed and understood, if pumping continues to occur at its current rate, we get the results that we just reviewed over the past few slides. To evaluate what level of pumping would result in no net seawater intrusion if no additional projects are implemented, we will be running this no new project scenario. Before I discuss the no new projects scenario, I want to discuss a little bit this chart on the right, which shows the relationship between groundwater pumping and coastal flux or seawater intrusion in the UAS from the suite of scenarios that were designed for the GSP. Each of these little dots represents an individual model scenario from the GSP. We have pumping rate on the X, seawater intrusion or coastal flux on the Y. And to estimate the sustainable yield, we use this linear regression equation to estimate what pumping would reduce in no net seawater intrusion, or what pumping rate on the X-axis would result in a 0 seawater intrusion on the Y-axis. We got an estimate for the UAS of about 32,000 acre-feet per year. For the 5-year evaluation, we're updating this approach to estimating the sustainable yield by iteratively adjusting pumping until we get to conditions where there is no net coastal flux or seawater intrusion over the 2040 to 2070 period. So it moves away from the linear regression estimation approach, and the goal is to incrementally adjust pumping until we get to that this simulated condition where pumping would result in a zero value on the y-axis. That's what this scenario is designed to do. So no new projects in the scenario, it's just incremental adjustments in pumping. After that scenario is complete, or while that scenario is being finalized, we will also be working on a project scenario that incorporates new projects and planned projects in the Oxnard and Pleasant Valley Basin and evaluates their influence on seawater intrusion and long-term groundwater sustainability. Before we get into the new projects table, which is shown here on the right, there's one management action that stays the same. There's the voluntary temporary fallowing program that's described in the GSP. That project or management action will remain consistent in this GSP. The North Pleasant Valley Desalter project is stated here. That's a typo. It's already in the baseline scenario. And what I want to emphasize here is that the projects that are in the baseline scenario will also be included in the project scenario. It's not that the two project suites are separate, but in the project scenario, these projects in the table on the right and the management action of the voluntary temporary fallowing program will be added to the projects that are simulated in the baseline. The projects that are shown on the right summarize the new projects that may be implemented in the Oxnard and Pleasant Valley Basins over that 50-year planning horizon. We have, at the very top of the table, we have the Freeman Expansion Project, which may bring up to an average of 10,000 acre-feet per year of additional Santa Clara River water into the OPV. The projected pumping offset associated with that project, again, is variable because depending on pipeline demands and forebay conditions, that water will either be diverted to United Spreading Basins, where it will recharge the Oxnard Subbasin, or be delivered on pipeline to users on the PTP and PVP. In addition to the Freeman expansion, there is the AWPF Phase 2 expansion project, which could bring between 7,500 and 15,000 acre-feet per year of recycled water. The ultimate destination of that water and use of that water could go to a variety of projects. It could be delivered to users in Pleasant Valley County through a recycled water pipeline. There's the option to deliver that and use that as an ASR program, as an ASR project that would be run by the city, and then also the potential to use that water for an injection barrier to support ongoing efforts to mitigate and control seawater intrusion. As I mentioned, the ultimate destination of that water is still under development, and so these projects will be described in the GSP, but current understanding is they're not going to be directly simulated. Again, as with the no new projects scenario, the goal with this scenario is to implement these projects and iteratively adjust pumping until we reach this condition where seawater intrusion into the Oxnard Subbasin from 2040 to 2070 results in no net seawater intrusion. The last scenario is that projects with ebb scenario. So that builds on everything that we just discussed and adds United's extraction barrier brackish water treatment project. Again, as I mentioned earlier on in the presentation, this project is simulated separately because operation of this project is intended to draw water levels down along the coastline. This nice schematic that I pulled right off of United's website provides a good overview of how the project is intended to operate. We have this big blue arrow that is intended to pump groundwater from the Oxnard Subbasin that will pull seawater in on the coastal side of those extraction wells. It will pull brackish water in, or is intended to pull brackish water in from the landward side of those extraction wells. So by doing this, water levels will inherently decline along the coastline. How the operation of this project interacts with other projects in the basins and how operation of this project limits the landward migration of that saline intrusion impact front will be evaluated through this specific scenario. This scenario will be simulated based on, again, our current understanding of the project that will extract about 10,000 acre-feet per year through the ebb project. Of that 10,000 acre-feet per year, 5,000 acre-feet will be produced from the brackish water treatment facility. and delivered to both the Navy and ag operators in the OPV. And again, as I've mentioned a few times here, this scenario is specifically called out because it will require a reevaluation of how seawater intrusion is tracked and how minimum thresholds and measurable objectives are defined. Where are we going to? Where have we been? Where are we going? So I provided an overview again of what was done for the GSP, how the modeling is being performed, and is being plans for how the modeling will be integrated into the 5-year evaluation. Currently, the future baseline scenario is complete. Again, those were the results that we summarized over a few slides here previously. The no new project scenario, or that iterative reduction in pumping scenario, is being simulated now, and the project scenarios are under development. And then farther on the horizon is simulation of the projects with ebb scenario. Important here is the timeline. We're really aiming for wrapping up all of the modeling scenarios in June of 24, which then brings us back to opportunities for ongoing engagement throughout this process. Again, where we're at is that April 24 stakeholder workshop, public workshop. Where we're going is continued modeling, continued evaluation of the components of the GSP, their appropriate use to support groundwater sustainability within the OPV, and really reassessing or reevaluating the appropriateness of the minimum thresholds, measurable objectives, and the estimate of sustainable yield. The draft reports for this are slated to be provided to the public in the summer, at which point there will be 2 additional public workshops that will provide an overview of the 5-year GSP evaluations, as well as the GSP amendments that will accompany these ahead of the submittal to GWR in January of 25. And with that, I talked a lot, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Yes, Terry.
It's Terry Foreman with Camrose Partners.
Please wait for the microphone, because we are recording.
Thank you again. My name is Terry Foreman with Camrose Water District, and I have a set of questions here. And depending on the answers to some of the earlier ones, the later ones may not be necessary. But the first set of questions really deals with what do you anticipate for stakeholder engagement? I mean, we've got this workshop tonight,
Yep.
and then we got a workshop in October. Doesn't sound like a lot of engagement, obviously, for just 2 workshops. So my question is, how do we engage? For example, we would like a lot more information relative to the technical details in order to evaluate some of the technical details. And a lot of that's probably going to require information from United on their model. They produce a lot more information, obviously. You know, this was a really nice overview and kind of an introduction, but there's a lot more information that we'd be interested in getting and seeing. And so my question is how is that going to take place? How can we get into really discussing and understanding the technical details in greater depth?
Yeah, I mean, so to start with the updates to the modeling, they have been documented in technical memorandums that are published on United's website. So the revisions to the hydrostratigraphy, the updates to the model, those are publicly available and describe what's been done since the GSP's been implemented. And then the second is stakeholder engagement. Again, we do have the workshop in October. And I believe, Arnie, correct me if I'm wrong, one of the directions from the board was almost a standing item or recurring opportunities for engagement between the public and FCGMA board through the normal board operations and meetings.
Yeah, but again, I'm not going to come to board meetings and ask for water budget information and hydrographs.
Yeah.
I would use that information, hydrographs, water budget information, in order to maybe make comments at the board, but I need the information to evaluate in order to make any kind of informed comments. So that's where I'm getting at, is how do we get that information in order to really educate ourselves about what's been done? And also, sort of parallel to that, we have provided information, as you well know.
Yeah, yeah.
And we would like to see how that was incorporated into the analysis to make sure that it was incorporated the way we meant it to be incorporated. So there's, no confusion about what we said, which is obviously, that happens. So we want to be able to have that interaction. We provided the information, and the next thing we see is, this presentation. So we don't know how it was actually used.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the information that we're using for projects for projected water usage and availability comes from the project proponents and water providers. So, for example, you provided projections for future conditions for delivery of recycled water, right? Now, that data is directly integrated into the model. Your team has a good understanding of what the future projections look like, so we run with that. The technical results, I don't know if I have a great avenue or answer to how that might be shared, but Rennie or Kim?
They would be in the draft report.
Yeah, absolutely. They will be in the draft report, which will be made available to the public in early summer. But yeah,
That's kind of pretty far down the road, and to be able to comment at that point is going to be pretty late. And obviously, probably not any opportunity to make any changes. I mean, you're going to try to finish the modeling, I think, in the next couple of months, maybe.
yep, that's right.
So,
Yeah, I would say the other component too is that the approach is not a wholesale overhaul of how sustainable management criteria and sustainable yield are estimated, right?
understand that.
Yeah, the approach that was developed for the GSP was developed with feedback and incorporation of an interaction with the technical advisory committee for the OPV.
Right, which I was a part of.
Yes, yeah. So that technical foundation is moving forward into the 5-year evaluations. It's not a wholesale overhaul. Yeah, I guess.
And there were a lot of questions raised that never really got addressed in that process. And so that was one of my other questions, is there was a comment when the GSP was finalized that there were a lot of questions and the comments that were sort of left on the cutting floor in order to get the GSP submitted. And I don't know if you're going back and looking through those and say, okay, are we really kind of catching all those that were sort of left behind?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I don't know, Jill, if you want to answer that specific one, but.
Yeah, we are going back and reviewing those. I think the other, as Trevor said, and the other thing to keep in mind, right, is the model updates that have been done by United in the intervening years to address their understanding of the basin, the collective understanding of the basin, and best represent the current conditions in the basin since the GSP was written.
So I haven't heard a response as to whether there's opportunity for more interaction and potential interaction with United in their modeling that's being done. For example, there are other hydrographs. I know they produce dozens of hydrographs. We've seen, a handful or two here. Those hydrographs would be useful. For example, our wells that we pump in the Pleasant Valley Basin, I know there's hydrographs that probably are available for those. How do we get those? Are they going to be posted somewhere, or?
Well, again, the hydrographs that we're analyzing are hydrographs for key wells in Oxnard and Pleasant Valley Basin. So, and that data will be published with the public reports, the draft reports that are submitted in early summer. Yeah.
Not getting very good answers here.
Are we not getting those hydrographs? As specific wells, we're just getting the ones we're asking for.
Yeah, we have requested hydrographs specifically for key wells. So we have not requested hydrographs for every well in OPV.
Yes. let me translate that. We're only paying for those hydrographs.
Okay, so can we get those hydrographs ourselves through United? Because my understanding is they're doing the modeling, United, that is doing the modeling for the GMA, and they will only release what you authorize for that purpose. So at least that's my general understanding. Are you saying that it would be, you would authorize release of other information if you wanted to pay for it? Is that what you're saying?
I think that would be between whoever's requesting and United. Our contract with United is specific to these key wells.
Yeah, but I'm just trying to understand, if we ask for information, are you going to not authorize them to release it if it was done for the GMA?
We'll handle that request as it comes through, but I don't see a reason not to release it.
Okay,
But it's not part of our scope.
yeah.
And that scope is available as part of the contract that was approved by the Fox Canyon Board in, was it September, October? Can't quite remember. If you want to go look, it's up publicly available. You can see all,
2022, that's what I think was when that scope.
no, it was 23. Yeah,
Time flies.
and so that'll list out what our contract with United for their deliverables are going to be for development.
Sure, and that's fine. I'm just trying to figure out if we want more information than that, how do we get it? Then what's in the scope with United? And it sounds like you don't have a problem for them releasing additional information, you're just not going to pay for it. Is that correct?
Well, they're also on a pretty tight timeline in terms of the workload that they're doing. So, I don't know. It's not,
We can't ask them to do that.
yeah, we can't ask them to do that,
No, I
If
understand
that's something
that.
you want to request of them, then that's up between you and United, I guess.
Okay, but you're not going to oppose them releasing information, that's what I'm trying to get at.
Only if it slows us down.
Yeah.
And if I could just add one thing, just for context, right? The reason we're asking for the hydrographs for the key wells is because that's what's necessary to do the evaluation, is those key wells and the water levels in those wells are what's discussed in the GSP. That's how DWR is evaluating this basin, how we've represented to DWR that we will be reporting data. And so that's why we need to focus on those wells.
Yeah, excuse me, and we're interested in the additional information to understand why a key well might not be meeting its minimum threshold. So in order for us to do that kind of evaluation, we're going to need more information, so, as to why it might not be. And if we have any impact on why it might not be making it. To move on to slide 22, I was really excited actually to see that change in evaluation. As you may remember, I was pretty adamantly opposed to this approach. So what you're doing now makes a lot more sense to me, and I think is a much more valid approach in terms of your iterative process. But I'm curious as to how you're going to do that. I know one of the big issues we had was how you adjusted Pleasant Valley and Oxnard. Are you planning just across the board adjustments? Or are you looking at changes in one basin versus the other basin? Or how are you planning to do that iterative process?
Yeah, so we're starting with the estimate of the sustainable yield for each basin. That's
Sure.
the first adjustment. And
Sure.
then based on that initial reduction scenario and the estimate of sustainable yield, the reduction will be done incrementally and I imagine proportionally, but I would say I want to hedge a little bit on the exact specifics until we see the results and how the individual basins are affecting those.
And again, we'd be interested in that process and the results of that. So
Yeah.
again, that would be engagement that we would like to have. So I'm not sure how we do that. Oops. I don't know, give the mic to someone else. Anyone else have any?
Other questions?
Are there other questions from members of the audience?
Hi, Dave Borchard. I'm director on Fox Canyon. And I had a question earlier today at our board meeting. And I see Kim here up top, and he might be best equipped to answer that question. The question at the board meeting was, we had discovered during that variance process from the OPV allocation ordinance, a significant amount of unreported pumping. And did that pumping ever make it into GMA records, and is it part of this current modeling run? Because I don't know that we knew that answer.
So I think the best answer to my knowledge is that some of it did. We haven't identified perhaps all potential unreported pumping, but I think that we've identified much of it. And in terms of most of that the unreported pumping was also prior to 2010, 2011. We had much better reporting after that. So certainly the period of pumping that we're modeling, which is it's
2016 to 22.
2016 and 22 includes, we would expect much less unreported pumping in that period. It was, the big problem we saw was prior to 2010 or 2011 time period.
Hi, good evening. Thank you. Greg Lewis here. Thank you very much for the presentation. Slide 16, please. From about 2015 going forward, it appears there's a pretty significant downward trend in groundwater extractions. And I did hear a comment that Jill, right? Sorry, recently, last few minutes, about wanting to understand the present conditions of the basin. So my question is, whether it's on behalf of DUDEC or the GMA, is there an effort to reach out to the pumpers, M&I, ag folk alike, to try to understand how, flying in the face of pretty historical and unprecedented drought conditions, there appears to be a significant downward trend in the extractions for what it looks like 4 or 5 years post 2015, and then similarly a little bit of an uptick in the last couple years.
Who do you want to take that?
Yeah, I mean, for outreach wise, I'm not sure what outreach to individual pumpers looks like. I will say that the trend in pumping during specifically 2019 and on, we did see increased recycled water availability. This is specifically for Pleasant Valley Basin. So the introduction of new recycled water to offset pumping in Pleasant Valley Basin would account for some of that reduction. Some of that too is, I believe 2019 was an above normal water year. So we see variability in pumping in the basin that is reflective of hydrologic conditions. So I think that might account for some of it as well. Yeah, I would say, and Jill?
Is there an effort on behalf of either DUDEC or the GMA to reach out to the stakeholders to try to understand if there's something that's being done at the field level, well level, to try that impacts these reductions?
No, I'd say no, we haven't asked those questions yet. We haven't asked those questions of ourselves, and we haven't asked those questions of the pumpers, but it's a valid question.
And I would just add, for the modeling, this is the empirical data that have been reported by the pumpers. So this is what the pumpers have been reporting that they had extracted. And one thing that Trevor didn't mention, but shown here is that transitional water year. That's where we transition from the old reporting periods to the new water year reporting periods. That was pulled out of the average because that was, there was a lot of confusion and some incomplete reporting, so that's not represented that year in the average. For the modeling representing what the pumping is, this is what has been reported to the agency.
GMA data, United data?
It's GMA data.
Thank you.
Martin Gramco, Southland Sod Farms. Maybe we could look at slide 19. Okay, maybe it's the next one. It's your 3 segments, the baseline model scenarios with the segment, there it is. So I think it's slide 7 that shows the coastal flux, leave it here, but that shows the coastal flux for the upper and lower systems.
Yes.
Do you have that coastal flux? It's probably, there's probably a reason why you don't show it, but I'm curious whether we can see it at some point, the coastal flux by segment.
Yeah, that does get produced from the model results that United are providing. For the GSP, those were lumped into the entire coastal segment, and for this evaluation, we are updating that analysis by looking specifically on the saline intrusion management area. So that data is available. For this evaluation, it will be lumped specifically to characterize flows into the saline intrusion management area, which differs from what was done for the GSP. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, partly. I mean, the answer is that the data is there.
Yes, the data is there.
And I probably could ask United, and they probably would have it for me. Is that kind of what we're saying? Yeah. But what I didn't understand was the last part of your answer. So are you evaluating the worst case area as being the driver of sustainable yield, or is this some kind of an average over the entire area?
So it is that what gets spat out from the model is every month how much water flows into the subbasin across these 3 coastal segments. We summarize that annually in the model. So through that we look specifically the 2040 to 2070 horizon. We annualize all of those monthly flows. We calculate an average, and we use that as our understanding of net seawater intrusion into the saline intrusion management area. That will be the metric that we're evaluating. Jill?
Yeah, and I think the update here is that for the GSP, in looking across all of those segments as a whole, there is actually net outflow into the Pacific Ocean in that green northernmost segment, right? And so what we're trying to understand, particularly with the projects and as we get to looking at the EB project, is what is that impact right in the area where we are in fact seeing seawater coming into the basin. So it's a refinement of the approach that was done in the GSP.
Gotcha, thanks.
So as a follow-up to that, Jill, we have fresh water going offshore on the West Oxnard Plain, and we're just not going to recognize that makes reductions in the West Oxnard Plain not make sense. I mean, we have wells running artesian there now. And if we're, in the cutback mode, I'm trying to understand why.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think right now, particularly in looking at projects, right, we want to understand how we can start to differentiate the parts of the basin. I will say that you're right, that in my understanding of how we're going to approach the pumping the no new projects scenario, right, where we're iteratively adjusting pumping, is that yes, those pumping adjustments will be applied to the West Oxnard Plain as well as to the saline intrusion management area. But I think this will highlight your point, right, in showing that if we're cutting across all of these places and we see increased water going out to the ocean in the north, then that's a management decision that should be brought to the board for discussion.
Okay.
John Lindquist, United Water Conservation District, and I wanted to respond a little bit to Greg Lewis because he mentioned United, or maybe you folks did, there was a question about water use or pumping in the plain since 2016, I believe. And I can probably give you some background if you're interested. 2012 to 2016, of course, really, yeah, that was about the right time. The drought had really hit, but United wasn't really in a position where we were importing a lot of excess state water project water at that time. So we had virtually no surface water deliveries. So groundwater extractions went way up. There was no other source for farmers. And I don't think recycled water from Oxnard, I don't think there was much being sent out on the plain either at that time. Starting in 2017, we started importing additional state water project in addition to our 3,500 acre feet per year allocation from the state. You're buying a lot more water and sending it down the pipelines, especially in fall, and timing our conservation releases so that more surface water would be available when the farmers really needed it out in the Oxnard Plain. So that helped quite a bit. 2019, with GMA support, we purchased a lot of state water project water, but we've been doing it ever since. So that's a part of it. 2019, the rainfall that we did get was average rainfall, but it was distributed perfectly. So we saw throughout our service area far lower use of groundwater that year, especially the first half of that year, than we'd seen in a long time. Even though it was just average rainfall, it just happened to fall every week, just about perfectly, or every 2 weeks. And then finally, by the thinking more recently, what was I going to say about that? Sorry, spaced out for a second. Most recently, the last couple of years, we've talked. That's what I want to say. Our operators have gone out and talked to operators on the PTP system because that really has a big impact on us. As happy as we are to see decreasing water use, that means for a system like that, an enterprise system, rates have to increase to keep doing the service that we're doing. And what we heard from all the operators is they're making a lot more effort to conserve water. They're changing their crops a little bit, but there are also a ton of people are just going to drip irrigation and low impact or lower water, conservation methods, essentially. And so that's what we've heard. We've really made an effort to find out, is it possible that people are lying to us? I guess it's possible. What we've seen also is since 2016 is the pumping records or reports that we receive from water users are almost identical to Fox Canyon's, what they're receiving, which was not the case prior to 2016. We often had very different reporting than they did. So I'm optimistic, as with Kim and I think Arnie, that we're getting as good a data as you can expect. It's never perfect, but we think what we're seeing is the best we have for running the model. Thank you.
Good evening. Gene West, Chair of Fox Canyon. It occurs to me during the development of the GSP, the process benefited significantly from the contributions of the Technical Advisory Committee. I look around the room, I see several people in the room that were on that committee, and I know that Kim and I have discussed this, and Arnie and I have discussed this before. The engagement process that's outlined for the 5-year reevaluation doesn't include a technical advisory committee, but it still might be helpful to set aside some time for basically a technical advisory workshop, so that those folks that were on that committee, or other folks, engineers or otherwise, who are more technically oriented than I, that are interested, could get a deeper dive into the reevaluation process and the data that's being used to reevaluate the GSP, so that they can more meaningfully contribute to those questions and the comments that'll be developed in October and November. I think it was helpful before. I think it'd be helpful to incorporate that again. Believe me, I appreciate the time constraints. And if there's a contract provision to increase the budget, let me know. But I still think it would be valuable. It was valuable before, and I don't have any reason to believe that it wouldn't be valuable again. Thank you.
Sorry, just as the good consultant that I am, I just need to say it's not currently in our scope, but we're happy to entertain that, yeah.
I know somebody can fix it.
Just to continue on a little bit, one of the items that I would like to see, and I assume if you're going to publish the water budget information from the model or allow us to interact with the United folks, I'd be interested in, as you evaluate these different projects, to show what the effects are in terms of flow between basins. For example, flow from Pleasant Valley to Oxnard, whether that increases as a result of those project operations or decreases, and sort of a time history of that going forward, as well as storage changes that occur as a result of that. Obviously, we'll see that in the hydrographs to a large extent, but it'd be good to know numerically what those effects are on the overall storage, and that obviously comes out of the model as well. And one last comment has to deal with kind of how does this potentially get used in the annual updates. I did look at the storage changes in the annual updates in this last one, and then compared that to what United published for their 2016 to 2019 update. And the annual reports, for example, in this last one through 2019 showed about a 4,000 acre foot change drop in storage in the Pleasant Valley Basin, whereas it looks like the model was only showing about 1,000. So the empirical relationship was showing about a 3 times faster rate in depletion of storage than apparently what the model showed. And I looked at it pretty quickly, so I may have not done the math exactly right, but it looked like about 3 times quicker. So I was wondering if, when you do the next update, if you will use these model results and sort of reset your baseline so that you'll say, okay, between this, I understand the 5 years, each year running the model to update, that's a big deal. But every 5 years, sort of reset that storage change baseline, so it doesn't look like you've dropped 15 or 20,000 acre feet when the model might only show 5 or 6 or whatever. So I just thought that was an observation that I want to pass along to you.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I think that we can definitely integrate the updated model results. Right now, the way that storage change is calculated is through a relationship between measured levels and simulated change in storage.
Right. And like I say, I think that for the annual is good, but you wouldn't want to continue it if you've got more recent information then.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally agree with that. Really great point. And also just wanted to say that your comments on the change in storage and the cross-boundary flows are spot on, and they have to be evaluated as part of this effort because it's part of how we're looking at basin sustainability. So yeah, thank you.
My name's John Grether Farming Company. I'm not a technical person, as some of the other speakers have been, but could you go to slide 11, please? My question is, it's really hard to read the discrepancy or the variation between the simulated and the measured. I'm curious as to whether, from a technical point of view, and you know, on the paper as well, it's just really hard to see what differences there are. Are those considered reasonable differences from a modeling point of view? Or, because in some cases, there seems to be quite a gap between measured and simulated, and it goes each way. Is there any question that the model is not capturing it as accurately as it should?
I think that my opinion here is that it is a reasonable reproduction of history and of measurements that we're getting from the model. And then also importantly, models can always be improved, and I think a good step into understanding the use of the model is that independent peer review and uncertainty analysis that was performed during the GSP. So not only do we get an assessment of how well the model reproduces water levels, but it also provides an assessment of how confident we can be in its predictions of the sustainable yield. So it's both a qualitative, is this reasonable, as well as a quantitative, how confident can we be in our results that we're pulling from?
As a follow-up question, is the model, when it goes back in time, is that an old model use, or is that the current model that's been revised being applied back to the measured data?
It's the current model being applied back. So the results you're seeing here, that same model that produced the yellow mustardy line is the model that's used for the future projections. So the model was, updated, again, based on that new geologic data, expanded to the upper basins. That model that was updated is the same model that's used to develop these projections. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Thanks, sir.
Good evening, Trevor. Brian Bondi. If you could go to slide 19, please.
Yep,
Oh,
right here.
actually, you're on it. The upper right hydrograph for well 19 MO5, there were just a couple things I noticed on there that may be signs of a QC issue that you may want to look at. If you look at the gray data from the 2019 work
Yes.
and compare it to the blue, there's quite a bit more variability in the pumping signal between those two runs, and I believe you said that there really was no difference in how you implemented pumping, so something happened there. The other thing I notice in the line is if you look at all the other graphs where you're comparing blue to gray, the timing of the wet and dry, except at the beginning, which you explained, line up. Clearly in this one, though, there's a shift in when that simulated recovery occurs. So just maybe something going on in the data input.
The shift is the operation of I believe, the North Pleasant Valley Desalter project. In the GSP, the start of that project, I believe, was 2020, and then it went for a 25-year horizon. That for the 5-year evaluation, that project starts again at the start of this simulation and goes for 25 years. It is not operated yet, so we're representing the entire 25-year operation of that project.
That one makes sense.
Yeah.
Sam Colley, OPV Coalition. I have one comment, one question. I just comment that I appreciate Chair West's offer to have an additional workshop. I think that would be really valuable. My question is on slide 24. If you're able to provide additional, I guess, clarity on the last bullet point there, the revised minimum thresholds and measurable objectives being considered with the EBIT project scenario. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And that all goes back to, to answer your question, I'm going to jump here. These red lines, the red line and the blue line, right? They're defined to limit the migration of the saline impact waterfront landward of the 2015 mapped extent, and to result in no net flux of water from the Pacific Ocean into the Oxnard Subbasin. If EB is implemented, it is intended to increase flow across that coastal boundary. The operation of the project as simulated will pump 10,000 acre feet per year through a set of extraction barrier wells that will cause an increase in flow along the coastline, which is shown here. It's not going to show up with those red arrows, right? So already it's moving away from how sustainability is currently evaluated in the GSP. Sustainability in that seawater intrusion is evaluated by characterizing the flow of water across the coastal boundary into the subbasin. This changes that by purposefully inducing that through operation of those wells, which will also cause water levels along the coastline to drop below sea level, presumably. Which gets back to the minimum thresholds that we were showing earlier that are set to prevent seawater intrusion. Those water levels would not be below sea level if they were protective of seawater intrusion, and there was no project like this that was being implemented. So this project definitely is a shift in how water levels will be managed along the coastline. Does that help explain the last few bullets? Not really? Jill? Yeah.
I'll take another crack at it. I'm not sure I'll be any better than Trevor, but ultimately, in the way that we've been looking at stopping seawater intrusion historically in the GSP and in the other scenarios that we're running for the evaluation, is to bring water levels up at the coast. We got to get them higher. And the higher you have freshwater levels at the coast, the more you're going to prevent, and you're going to make a dam against seawater intrusion, right? In this scenario, we're drawing water levels at the coast way down, but the project, I should say, the project is drawing in the brackish water that's already inland. It's to the east. And so it's drawing that water in, and it may be also drawing in some water from the west through the aquifers there. I think the modeling is what I would need to discuss any more of that in detail, but the fundamental difference is you're creating a trough at the coast versus raising water levels at the coast. And so under that scenario where you've created this trough, you need to be able to, you wouldn't have a water level that is below the minimum threshold that we set in the GSP and say, oh, that's great, DWR, we're fine. What we have to tell DWR is here's why we're lowering the minimum threshold. Here's why we're making this target measurable objective, and it's going to be a lot lower than you saw in our initial GSP. But we've got a project that we can demonstrate that's going to stop seawater intrusion from going in, and that's what DWR needs to see.
Norman Huff with Camarosa. Just to follow up on that, are there implemented projects like this that have shown this to be a successful seawater intrusion barrier?
I'm not familiar if there are large-scale projects like this that have been implemented.
Yeah, I think I'll leave that to United's folks to talk about. I know they've done quite a, and John or others to discuss. Just I know they've done a lot of research into this, and I'm not aware of this, but I'll leave it to them.
Hi, Chris Coppinger, United Water Conservation District. So yes and no. We can point to a project that was done by DWR in the early 60s, run for 8 months originally and then a little longer, that demonstrated an effective barrier at Wainimi. The project failed because the materials that were used corroded very quickly in seawater, so that's why it's not around anymore. So that's a historical example. A similar project has been constructed in Alameda, where they're seeing water come into the Cone Basin, where you can when they've had a history of pumping water out, returning it to the San Francisco Bay, and 10 years ago, help me out, John, 10 years ago, they built a treatment plant, or they expanded the treatment plant 10 years ago, and they're doing desal up there and taking the water that had been pumped from the wells, returning it into the supply for the area. So 15 years ago, yeah. So it's not common, but we've seen it work before. Oh, yeah.
My name is Jason Sun, United Water staff. So just try to explain ebb water in a non-technical way to look at this, the purpose of ebb extraction barrier. If you think about what you have been shown earlier, to determine the sustainable yield, it really depends on how much seawater coming in, right? Ebb water is basically take seawater intrusion out of that calculation. So if we deploy extraction barrier along the coast, that means when you calculate safe yield or sustainable yield, you don't need to worry about this factor because this barrier stop it, take the intrusion out of the consideration. And without that, you are always going to concern, you have to calculate based on how much water coming in. And then you have to lower, you have to consider how much reduction you have to do. But if you have an extraction barrier, so if we do it along the Navy, that portion of intrusion flux, you don't have to calculate because it's stopped by the extraction barrier. Then you have to look at other places. So that's the purpose of extraction barrier. Thank you.
Jamie, we had one over there. Alden, did you have a question?
Good evening. My name is Alden Broom with the Watalaska Mutual Water Company. I guess my question is most related to slide 7. So in shifting the future baseline scenario from the 3-year period to a 7-year period, I understand the table that you present here is the 3-year period. Mm-hmm. I think it would be helpful from a stakeholder's perspective to understand what the 7-year period looks like in pumping. And given we've talked a lot about projects and conjunctive use, the Santa Clara River water, as an example, would love to see this table be expanded to include the project water and the Santa Clara River water and the other water that's being considered, because when you look at future baseline with projects, you see the total shrinking and you're focused on pumping, and I understand that. But I just think it would provide a better perspective for those of us out there in the basin who are worried about individual areas or their pumping future or their water use future. What is the supply going to look like under those scenarios, and all water supply? Because I think that's clear from a water budget perspective, and what's being ultimately managed by the agency. So, and the only thing so I guess that's a comment really. I mean, I don't think you have that data ready for the 7-year period. Would like to know a little bit more about why you focused on those 7 years. I'm happy to hear from John Lindquist that the data's matching up and you're proud of the data set that you've had more recently. So, that, I guess comment and mostly some small question there. Thank you.
So I appreciate the feedback on effectively what you're asking for is a total water supply table, right, for the various scenarios. It would summarize pumping as well as surface water availability, recycled water availability, and the impacts of various projects and total water supply. That is described in the narrative in the GSP, but I think a table is also helpful for summary purposes. I'm going to jump ahead here. So was the question, why did we choose 2016 to 2022 for pumping?
I think about it as, are those conditions reflective of the future? And absent the other information that we can't see in this presentation, it's hard for us to tell. What are you assuming for surface water deliveries? What are you assuming for total recycled water deliveries. How are those represented versus the GSP?
Yeah.
And/or in the future? Because that gives us a better picture, I feel, of is that the reality that we're experiencing on the ground? I mean, I think there's been comments made about conservation that's being achieved. We certainly have cost pressure now, have growing cost pressure on water use. So there may be some interesting dynamics that are available when you look at a fuller picture of the water use in the basin.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I would just say that 2016 to 2022 is a representative of the future. I would say it's representative of current groundwater usage, and then the scenarios are designed to evaluate if future uses look like today, what do groundwater conditions look like, and then what type of production scenario would need to be required to address the seawater intrusion along the coastline.
Yeah, I actually forgot to make my comment on that. I'm glad he brought that up. I think to help people understand how the operation occurs, you point out that you use the 2016 to 2022 average pumping. That's really kind of a starting condition. And the pumping varies dramatically depending upon those other available supplies. And I know in the GSP, pumping varied between, the average was 14,000, I believe, for that 2017, 15 to 17 period, 14,000. So, but it varied between 10,000 and 20,000. And so I think it would be helpful to, like you say, provide a table or something that shows what pumping actually happens, and then sort of pair that with, okay, what were the other supplies that were making that up? Because as I understand the way United does it is they have a target sort of production and or demand, if you will, and they try to meet that demand by either groundwater or surface water supplies that are available, if I understood that correctly. So I think, yeah, having that variation in pumping would help people understand, you know, how that's varying through time. It's not a constant at all.
Yeah, I appreciate that feedback. Any other questions?
Since we're on this slide, I'll just ask, I think I heard you say during the presentation that the 2016 and 2022 pumping lined up well with the allocation, the initial allocations from the ordinance. Is that true?
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct, yeah.
And is there going to be a scenario where that allocation is modeled? Like, I understand that pumping is variable through the year because of conditions, but with given the carryover provisions and other provisions, is there any effort to look at if everyone pumped their max pumping allocation every year, does that look differently than the variable pumping?
Yeah, short answer is that scenario is not being evaluated, right? The baseline rates are the 2016 to 2022. And as we saw from those preliminary results, those are not sustainable in the basin without new projects. So from there, incrementally march down to get to that no net seawater intrusion condition. But short answer is no, that scenario is not directly being simulated.
So that actually brings up another question is, do you recall what the average over that 2023 to 2069 period was for each basin, what the average pumping ended up being?
Total pump, not from the model, right? I would need to go back and look at that to account for the surface water availability.
Right.
Yeah, so I don't have a great answer at this time. No.
Okay.
I think that was a long enough pause. Any last questions? We've got the room till 8 o'clock, so. Okay, I think we're ready to wrap it up. I think I heard definitely more engagement and more feedback is appreciated. Technical workshop, we'll work on that, definitely getting that in scope, and definitely continue making updates to the board of the feedback we're hearing in these rooms. So just to keep both the board engaged and all our stakeholders engaged as possible. With that, are there any last comments? Oh, yeah, thank you, Kim. We are repeating this tomorrow, but for the Las Posas Valley Basin, and pretty much the same routine, but for the data on Las Posas Valley Basin. And then we're going to work on getting the next 2 workshops scheduled as soon as possible. So there's as much as advance notice as we can get. Okay, thank you, everybody.